Okay, students, we're going to look at using Quixel Mixer today and how to use it to either mix together your own materials or 3D paint on your own custom objects. So I've opened up Mixer here, and first you can see we have our projects, which are basically like folders full of all the different material mixes you've made. One of them here is the sample mixes, which you should see on your computer, which have a bunch of official Quixel mixes that they've released that you can check out and see how they're put together. I'm going to go ahead and make a new project folder, and I'm going to call this just like my game. In your instance, it should be related to whatever project or game or situation you're working on, or you could use your name on the computer. And once you have a project folder, we're going to go ahead and create a new mix. I'm going to call this just tutorial plain as I show some stuff today, and the working resolution of 2K is pretty solid. As you know, Mixer is related to the Quixel Megascans, and I usually encourage you students to stick with 2K so we don't fill our computer up. And usually because the things that we're producing are not much more than 2K, so we would lose a lot with that resolution. So here we can see the default Mixer layout, and we have a number of different things to look at here. First of all, I am moving around using the middle mouse button and pressing it down to pan, just like 3D Studio Max. However, unlike 3D Studio Max, it's Alt and left click to rotate. And then I can zoom in and out with my scroll wheel. Up here on the left, we see the different finalized views that we can use in case we only want to see the albedo or only the metalness or only the roughness. I'll show these again in a minute when we have a material on here. And then we have a preview mesh to start with, so we can look at it while painting on a plane, cube, sphere, or cylinder. Finally, we have a toggle that turns displacement on and off, a toggle that turns off tiling, and a toggle that turns on and off the grid. Also up here, we can see our local library of what you've downloaded or came pre-installed with Mixer, as well as this automatically connects us to the full online Quixel Mixer suite with all of its 10,000 plus objects and materials that we could download. On the right side, we are currently in the Setup tab where I've chosen plain 2x2 meters and again the 2K resolution, and finally the material ID, which we will get to in a further video. I'm okay with all this, so I'm going to switch to the Layers tab. This is where we'll be mostly spending our time. This here is the Layers tab, much like it would be in Photoshop, and then to the right is more of a Details panel that has all the layer settings. In the bottom are your masks and group settings for creating groups, creating a mask stack, which is basically a layer mask, a material ID mask or a material ID layer, and finally a paint mask. Let's go ahead and put a surface layer on really quick. I'm going to choose my first layer section here and choose one of these to be my base layer. Now, for this situation, I think I want something that has just like some bricks or some tiles. So I'm going to click over here on floors and see what I have. No. This guy looks good. Decorative brick wall. I'm just going to drag him over, and it'll take a moment for him to load. And then we can see here I have this brick wall set as my plane. And if you look in the details panel, you can see that this brick wall that we have here came with an albedo, a metalness, a roughness, a displacement, normal seclusion, and an opacity mask, which is off. Now, what's cool is this is just like downloading a Quixel material, but I can make individual changes to it if I want before I even start mixing with other materials. So if I don't want the main color of my bricks to be this sort of brown, I can move it sort of over into a more orange space. I'm going to go something like that. And I can individually turn off any of these different components of the material, and we can see how it changes it. Up here, I can change to a 2D view. Will show me it straight on, as if this is the texture that is being put on it. This should be familiar with you from the UVW look of it, like when we have in 3D Studio Max. And finally, this changes our lighting environment, because of course things like the normal map and the metalness and the roughness are all affected by the light shining on the surface. So this gives us different lighting situations. And I primarily use Pisa, which is sort of an outdoor bright afternoon sunlight. Now in the upper right hand corner here, we have multiple types of layers going across. We have the surface layer, the decal layer, the smart material layer, the solid layer, the liquid layer, the noise layer, and finally the paint layer. And I am going to go through each of these in this tutorial as we put together material that we could use on a surface in our project. So for starters, I already used one here. The surface layer lets us use any of the built-in pre-made layers that are downloaded into our local library, which this is set 6 that I believe I installed automatically on the computers. And it's got some interesting sets in here. This would also have any of the ones that you previously downloaded with Megascans for other projects, if you have made sure that your preferences, so you have to make it the same as it is as the Megascans library you're using when you're using Quixel Bridge in Unreal Engine 5. Double check here. This is my home computer, but at school, you should see it as D users and then your name for the Megascans library. Now, you can also directly pull to the online bridge and grab something. So I'm going to look for a moss here, and I'm going to also tell it to only show me surface types because I don't want objects. And I'm going to try to find, this is mossy stone and mossy, I just want moss. So let's see if I can find one here. So this is mossy ground. Here's another mossy ground. I like this one. Now what I could do is download this, and then it'll go to my local library. I can also just automate it by grabbing it and pulling it over once I've downloaded it. So you can see it downloads here within the editor. And once it has downloaded, I should be able to grab it and pull it in. It does not want to at the moment. There it is. Takes a little while to load. Now, in putting it beneath, like I just did here, that is telling the mix that the base of my material is mossy ground and the decorative brick wall is a like a layer over it. And that's not how I would want to deal with it. I would want a brick wall that then has moss growing on it. So I'm going to switch their order. And a couple of things are happening right now. So we can see the moss sort of coming through in different ways. We can also see this bumpiness overlaying it. And if we look over on the right side here, I want to bring your attention to the blend options here. So first of all, we have height blending, which is going to allow us to reduce how much the moss peeks through our material here. So I can try to have the moss here. I also have these blend radius and preserve details sections to affect how that is going through. It used to be that Quixel had basically, it would ask you whether or not you wanted to blend from above or from below. Now we just have height blending, and you can invert it if you want it to come from the other side. You also have an opacity that you can control here that would let this moss be more see-through on the surface if we wanted it to be. Finally, we have the wrap to underlying, which forces it to wrap to the displacement of the layer beneath it. If I wanted to make sure that our that are moss growing in these little areas between the bricks aligned to the dip between there. And that matters more also if I was doing like a cliffside or something. This placement here controls where the second material, the mossy ground, here is on the surface, and I can use it to slide things left and right, rotate them and such, so I can rotate it here and have it grow in a different direction. This probably matters more for less organic things, different than moss. I'm going to go back to this brick wall, and I think I want to go into the displacement map and just make it more displacey. Specifically, I want to increase the depth we can kind of see here in between my bricks, which then also will affect when I use the mossy ground and play with the height. You will now see it more cleanly sort of growing in those lines in between the brick. The second layer is the decal layer. I have a couple that are already downloaded here. Got some branches, some wood dust, a manhole cover, some graffiti, and of course I can go online and look only for decals. For now I'm going to grab the graffiti tag, and we can already see how this can overlay on my surface. A big important part of the decal type is the placement, which matters far more because it's typically a single object that is being added onto here. I can control the scale of my graffiti here. I can control its location by offsetting its X or its Y, and I can also rotate it. This is one where you definitely want it to wrap to underlying, because otherwise it'll look, I mean, sometimes it's good, but here it looks like it's almost popping out of the surface, whereas we definitely want the paint to be applied directly to the surface. In one like this, again, I could grab and change, the color of what I'm adding. And you could actually, even with this, control the height blending of the paint itself, which could be useful if you need to have it sort of be faded away, or if you're mixing it with something that would go over the top, like some sand or some dirt or moss. You could also lower its opacity to allow the actual background through more. The next layer is the smart layer, which are a number of smart materials that come pre-packaged with Mixer. Looks like there's 379 in the defaults here, and many of these come with lots of pieces. So if this is scuffed painted plastic, I can drag it in here, and you can see it comes as a whole folder with lots of things going on. I'm going to toggle some things off here so we can just look at it. So this surface now looks like scuffed painted plastic, and it comes with multiple layers and multiple layer masks on it with different amounts of noise and such. So it comes with a dirt layer you can change, paint scuffs, a base paint, and a color variation. This is a useful starting place for a lot of materials if you don't know what you're starting with and you can't find something directly on Quixel that you're looking for. There are lots of ways to use your smart materials to start with. Go ahead and lose this one for now. Next is the solid layer, which is just a solid color. And in adding this here, we can see that it has height blending on. It's exactly at a flat point. So you can see how much the displacement of the bricks or other things is coming out. Solid layers are often good to be a base in case anything comes through. And you can see here that we have sort of lots of things coming through at the moment by making that our base layer. This would also be useful if I had something with holes in it or whatnot. It's really good to just add color and to have a solid base if you need it. Just to fill some stuff in and be in there. You can also make it go away in the situation I've put in here by affecting how much the underlying or the other things show through. Next is one of the most fun ones, I think, and it is the liquid layer. Now, the liquid layer makes a flat liquid go over the surface. It cannot have displacement like the other layers can. It's always flat water because it's affected by gravity. Here, it's treating it as straight down. Now, what's cool about the liquid layer is you can change the threshold for where it is on the surface, aka adding or losing more water, just like we could on other layers. But also, you get to control the moistness of the layers it affects. So here I have this moist threshold. It makes less sense for something like brick, but for something like sand, it has this huge effect where you can see, even though the layer of the water isn't rising, this water is affecting more or less of my brick. Let me see if I can grab a sand really quick and add it on here. Let's grab that. Let's turn some of these things off. So here I have some sand, and if I add the liquid layer on top, we can see the liquid sitting in this sand. And you can see here sort of the bits that aren't in the water but are still showing this moistness. Here I can turn it off, and then here I can show it very on, and you can see the sand gets more or less wet. It'll be even more noticeable if I lower my threshold here. So I just have tiny little bits of water, but I can increase the way the moistness affects the layers. This can be really cool when making terrain materials, specific terrain materials that you'll use in Unreal. You can add puddles that actually are full and have reflective surfaces and that affect the things around it. All right. Next is our noise layer. So this adds a randomly generated noise to the surface. It typically is going to be used for displacement. And I can show the way that changing the amplitude would affect it here. These can also be used for mask layers so that things only affect things in certain ways. For example, I can do this, which is going to make this noise layer affect my mossy ground here. So that now if I change my mossy ground, it's only affecting where those noise overlays are. Instead of if we turned this one off, my mossy ground here affects the whole thing. Our final layer is the paint layer, which is the one that literally lets us paint on our surface. So on the left here, I have a whole bunch of brush settings from brush shape, which you can load custom images into, to size and angle jitters as I hold down and move across the surface. And by default, it is going to paint on the albedo, the metalness, the roughness, and the displacement layers. So as I paint here, it is not only overlaying a color on the surface, but it is actually pushing down into the surface just a little bit, which you can see right here. The displacement is set to lower. If I set it to higher and maybe increase the amount, you will see the way it's actually pulling up on what I paint, the way it's affected by the lighting, you can definitely see. You can also turn some of these off. If I only want to paint color, I can paint color. If I only potentially want to paint roughness or metalness, I could do that too. The most useful thing for this is that we have lots of custom brushes up here, and there are many more you can get from Quixel. So here I can have a strange sponge brush to paint something on the surface. But one super important understanding about this is I can change the size of the brush, but it is affected by my zoom. So if I zoom in here, notice that it gets bigger with me as I zoom. But also, if I was doing it, this is hard to see here because I'm not on a more interesting surface, but if I was on a surface or a custom object, it will be affected in 3D if I push from a different space. But something like a foot can be useful. You can literally have like footprints in the sand being added and stuff like that. If I go ahead and make this a cube right now, looks like it won't actually let me paint on it. So I'll have to show the difference when we start bringing in our own custom objects. So those are the default layers. Go ahead and create a material or a space that looks cool that you could use in a project. I definitely advise some sort of terrain-based one for start. It's very easy to overlay some sticks and put in some puddles and some mud and add some detail to it. But you can absolutely also experiment with brushes and putting stuff together. In the next video, we're going to look at how to deal with custom objects in Quixel Mixer.